So I'm interested in this idea of aerial urbanism, and I suppose to kind of give a bit of context to that, as an architect, usually when people talk about architecture, people talk about buildings, and the first definition that comes up on Google is basically the art's practice of designing and constructing buildings, which is a pretty good one, but I more like to think of it a bit more broadly as the design and programming of space. And so when it comes to the city, usually we're concerned with just the static, the built fabric, but I'm kind of also concerned about everything that goes on between. Why should we care about that? Well, to give an example of this, so the Global Footprint Foundation released their annual report in 2012, looking at our economic footprint on the Earth and looking at sort of earlier in the 20th century, our output and also the concept of our output, our sort of economic output, was that we lived in this sort of this world of indefinite resources, and that we would never make any sort of indelible impact on nature itself. But now today, the opposite is true, and we've actually exceeded the amount of the natural Earth resources and its ability to regenerate. 2012, we were consuming 1.5 times what the Earth could actually provide us. And combined with that, since last year, over 55% of the human population is living in cities. So it's all basically to say that they should really start thinking of doing more with less. Which brings me on to airspace, and in particular drones. And so drones have a very interesting history. They have a very rich history in the military context, but even looking at World War I, for example, the journalist Paul Virilio described drones as perhaps one way or even the ultimate way of seeing. And really, drones they're good at, generally speaking, 3 things: sensing the world around us, transporting matter from A to B, like sending things, receiving things, and performing tasks remotely. And if we think of that as program, in the way that architects design buildings like residential, commercial, think of this as sort of the program of the city, we can start to make the airspace around us useful and design airspace almost like we would a building. To get there, though, we also should probably start thinking about drones in a different way, really as kind of integrated parts of the urban fabric itself, not so much as remotely piloted aircraft coming from the aviation industry, but as a kind of new type of technology completely. And really, drones are sort of an amalgamation of a lot of existing technologies to put together already. And we've reached this point now where we have kind of accessible consumer-grade technology because of the increase in microprocessing power and developments in sensor technology and cost reductions. So it's a much lower entry barrier to the technology. So a lot of you probably recognize this, the DJI Phantom. Your experiences will probably be more like that. That's been, you probably know someone that got one as a Christmas present this gone year. So really, we're not quite at the sort of jazz age yet. We have a bit of a way to go, and they really have, for me, they have this kind of insect-like potential that we can even sort of think of drones as, especially as they become more autonomous, these agents that we start to live with in cities as they perform useful tasks, almost like insects do out in nature. So some thoughts about how we go forward looking at it from a design lens, and categorize this into sort of 4 main areas: so form, energy, autonomy, and communication, or for those who like acronyms, that shortens to FACE. This is sort of the status quo today. You have your drone operator who's trusted to operate this flying robot, essentially. So really, that's what we're starting with, this sort of very amazing bit of technology, but ultimately this kind of clunky bit of kit and quite dangerous bit of kit that's flying through the air. So what can we do? So we can address the form. We can actually start to really think of these as like robust objects and much more user-centric, moving away from like installing LiPo batteries and having arming processes to just an on-off button. Think of it almost like a flying smartphone, if you like. And actually making them identifiable and interactive. Drones that can actually talk back to us, and when we see one out in the street, how can we design it so that it becomes as familiar as like a lamppost is on the street, and design it such that we feel comfortable with it in our environment. We can expect to see many gains in battery technology, solar charging, high capacity batteries. But then we can start to sort of rethink how they're controlled as well. So currently, we remotely pilot them. There's many gains going into sort of first-person view perspective, so you don't have to be able to see it in your line of sight, but you can just operate it through video transmission. But ultimately, this is going to move away towards autonomous flight planning. This is already happening, of course, but autonomous flight planning really allows us to kind of tell drones where to go from a high level. And in parallel to that, there's many gains being made in sense and avoid technologies so that on a kind of local level, when a drone is basically performing its tasks, it can navigate its own environment by itself. Cloud connections and basically getting rid of any distance requirements. And now at this point, we can really start to think of drones as, of many drones working in one system, not bound by any kind of distance limitations, and just operating over the city. And it becomes a question of developing the right software and system infrastructure to do that. What's more, we can then actually introduce APIs and actually provide access to the system to allow other people to provide new types of services and develop the user interface for a wider body of people to actually use. Again, starting to think of drones as a useful urban infrastructure. So I thought I'd show you a couple of projects, more recent projects that have been looking at drone development through the lens of design. And a couple of these I want to show at the Design Museum. This will be showing until March. So this first one is it's sort of taking the trajectory of consumer-grade drones further and thinking, how might drones become like your sort of flying iPhone 11? How might this become like your personal companion that lives with you in the home? And why would it do that? So this is a little, this little guy here is called Aero. And I thought I would show you a little video that gives you an idea of how he operates as a personal companion that basically lives with you in the home. Doesn't look like we have any sound by any chance, do we? So in a way, this is an extrapolation of what's already going on in the market in terms of home security technologies. You have things like your Nest that's allowing people to kind of stay connected to their home. And this was a kind of a design experiment to think of how drones might become literally part of the home. This is almost like a middleman between you and your home environment. It lives with you, but even when you go away, it takes on a life of its own. So, as I say, it learns to understand your home environment. And then when you go to work, it gets to work as well. And it's keeping your home safe. And we can think of many different applications for this. And we're looking through the point of view of the drone, but in a way, this is actually a kind of a real-time user interface that you can access wherever you are.
Keep yourself safe with Aero, your domestic companion. Aero
and
stays at home to keep your place secure, whilst keeping you connected and updated.
As a sort of
Aero lives with you
to
and always has your back, giving you peace of mind against the unexpected.
Afford ourselves a little
Aero,
bit of
for your personal protection.
We should be kind of thinking critically about whether we want this or not. So this is also kind of asking how much privacy are we willing to give up to actually allow this technology into our lives. At what point does this even become necessary? As you saw it identifying an unidentified drone, is that going to be the security risk of the future? I hope not, but let's see. And one final project, which is, again, looking at drones as an integrated part of the urban fabric. And in this case, it's really looking at how can we tap into the sort of untapped potential of the roofscape of the city, and how can we actually use it as a productive agricultural surface to increase food production locally and closer to market. And drones are perfect for that. They can actually carry tools that can essentially perform the entire cycle of activities that's required, from sowing, monitoring, precision spraying and harvesting, and many other technologies that are currently in development. So the idea is that these are actually encapsulated in these little capsules, and it's sort of reversing our thinking about how we think about drones today. Currently, we think about drones as these robots, and then we attach stuff to them, and then we can just like add things on it. And that's one way of thinking about it. This is actually saying, okay, well, what if let's make the tools that we need to build the system, but then let's give them the intelligence and the capability to fly. So we're starting with this capsule. These quadcopter arms are added to it to enable it to fly. It then gets a structural protective ring, an LED strip that actually allows it to sort of talk back to the public. If you see it out on the rooftop, you get an idea of what it's actually doing, and what its status is, and what it's up to. And then this protective shell that really gives it this kind of robust object-like quality to it. And this all allows us to create this new system that brings together a lot of different players. So on the bottom left, you have the user who can access the system through, well, let me go to the next slide to give a better idea. But essentially, it's kind of creating a new connection between people, their environment, through technology. So there's many new possibilities for developers to create apps for this. This is connected to the system infrastructure, bring in manufacturers to actually develop this technology to then go out and operate over the city, and bring in landowners and to allow us to actually think, again, as an architect, I'm kind of interested in this kind of world, rethinking what land value is. We can actually start to think of surfaces as productive, and developers who are building housing schemes, for example, may not be purely driven by maximum profit, but actually thinking about what added value can we bring to the urban environment. And to give you a flavor of what that might look like, this is of an initial mock-up. And this is work in progress. This is an ongoing project. But just to give you a flavor of what it would look like, it might look something like this. So what actually starts off as quite a pragmatic system that we can produce, improve the output of the city, actually has the sort of poetic side as well, that we can almost start to think of the city as this botanical garden in the sky. Almost. Thanks very much.